Hi, this is Ted Carr. Welcome to my presentation entitled Sequence of Returns Risk. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Here's a look at what I'm going to be talking about today. First, I'm going to open up with a few brief announcements, followed by what inspired this presentation, why did I decide to talk about sequence of returns risk today, and what exactly is meant by sequence of returns risk. Then I'm going to present an example to demonstrate or illustrate what sequence of returns risk is all about. And I'm going to share with you what the scenarios are. There's only two, and the conditions with respect to those two scenarios, my critical assumptions, and of course, none of my presentations would be complete without an Excel spreadsheet. So I'll segue over to my Excel spreadsheet model. And in that model is a worksheet that goes through the comparisons of scenario 1 versus scenario 2, which is really the crux of this presentation. Then I'll talk a little bit about the ways that are available to you to mitigate sequence of returns risk before I summarize and wrap things up. Okay, let's get started. So those announcements. In case you don't remember, I recently wrapped up my Retire Hobby blog and podcast earlier this year. So if you're searching for either of those two things, they're no longer available. However, as this video is a testament to, I still produce the occasional video, but to be honest with you, the ideas haven't been flowing or just streaming forth with regards to me getting inspired enough to produce a video. So on that note, if you have any ideas of a topic that you think might be interesting for me to do, feel free to send them to me at retirehobby@gmail.com. Now, also, I want to mention that I have received a lot of requests. They stream in every week for a copy of my bond ladder spreadsheet, which I've updated. So it's a brand new version of that. And I want to say, hey, if you want a copy of that bond ladder spreadsheet, again, just email me. I'm happy to send it to you. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I have a series of 3 videos on my channel on bond ladders, and you can check those out. And if it's something that you're interested in, hey, let me know, and I'm happy to send that spreadsheet to you. You can follow me on Twitter. My disclaimer, I'm not a financial professional. The information I present is informational and is intended to illustrate various points. I'm not making any recommendations or offering guidance. You should consult with your financial representative when making your decisions. Okay, got that out of the way. Let's get going. So let's get to what inspired this presentation. Well, I think just general events or circumstances around the markets and the economy got me to thinking, right? So what I mean by that is the year-to-date market performance. This is mid-July 2022, by the way. So the S&P 500 is down about 21%, which puts it in bear territory. The S&P is down roughly 15%, which is correction territory. And of course, you're all too familiar with the condition of the economy. High inflation, increased chance of recession, pretty much sucks at this point in time. So, I thought about the fact that every single day, 10,000 people are turning 65, which is sort of the traditional retirement age, which means, hey, retirement is on the table for a lot of people. And, when you get to that point in life, you find yourself having to transition from accumulating wealth to dispersing or withdrawing your wealth to pay for your living expenses. So I think the nature of this presentation is all about retirement planning and how sequence of returns risk can affect retirement planning. So what is meant by sequence of returns risk? Well, it's the order and timing of poor investment returns, increasing the risk of exhausting your retirement savings. During market downturns, spending exceeds investment returns. Sequence of returns risk is framed by when it happens, onset of retirement and or shortly after retirement. Now that said, I think that what I'm talking about today can apply to any time frame, but specifically the definition of sequence of returns risk is tied to retirement. Scenarios and conditions. So as I mentioned, I have 2 scenarios. The first features equity markets dropping 22.5% and 10% in years 1 and 2 of retirement. The second scenario changes that timing of those same drops to years 12 and 13. The conditions simply stated, I'm looking at portfolios that are comprised of 60% equities and 40% fixed income. I could do a lot of conditions, and I have when playing with my model, but for this presentation, I want to kind of keep it basic and simple, just so that I can illustrate the points with respect to sequence of returns risk. Assumptions. You start out with $1 million in your investment portfolio. I'm looking at a 30-year planning horizon for retirement. I'm using actual S&P 500 annual returns for the past 30 years to inject some reality and some randomness instead of just making some standard across-the-board assumption. And I'm using a 3% yield on the fixed income portion of those conditions, the 40% that's fixed income. I'm using the 10-year yield, which today is almost 3%. I'm starting with inflation in year one at 8%, and then I'm going to show our 3% annual inflation for the remaining 29 years. I'm going to follow the 4% safe withdrawal annual rate rule, and that, of course, is adjusted for inflation. That's sort of one of the core tenets of the 4% safe withdrawal rate, is you adjust it for inflation each successive year as you are taking money out of your investment portfolio. Now, I'm not considering any other income or assets. I just want to make this a very simple and basic presentation. So no other income is factoring into this analysis. Scenario comparisons. Okay, so the scenario comparisons are contained in the Excel spreadsheet. And in that, the first worksheet is my calculator, where I do all the number crunching. Then the second worksheet, as you see, is where I do the comparisons between scenario 1 and scenario 2. So here is the Excel spreadsheet that I was just referring to, and it's set up with scenario 2 in the cells. So let me just kind of review what we have here so you can take a look at it. I'm not going to go into too much detail because honestly, it's one of the more complicated Excel spreadsheet models I've put together. I'm happy to share it with you if you're interested. Just email me, I'll send you a copy. And hey, if you have questions, I'll get back to you and let you know, the logic and what's in some of the cell formulas. But let's just go over what's here. This is years 1 through 30. I said the planning horizon is 30 years. There's our $1 million starting point with respect to our entering retirement investment portfolio. And here you'll see that this is where I put inflation, 8%, 3%, etc. The withdrawal rate, kept it simple. I did some pretty fun things with the model, but it took me a lot of time to just say, oh, let's keep it simple and keep it at 4%. So there you see the 4% withdrawal rate. And then the adjustment, where it's adjusted for inflation every single year. And that is within the confines of the safe withdrawal rate rule. So it goes up every year. So you're increasing your withdrawals by the rate of inflation, which is safe according to the many studies that have confirmed the validity of the 4% safe withdrawal rate. Market gain or loss, I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. And this number here is key. It's the adjusted portfolio, what the balance is in your investment portfolio. The amount that you withdraw, which is that safe withdrawal rate times the amount that's in your investment portfolio. And then to make this maybe a little bit more realistic, I added a row here on expenses so that at some point you'll see a divergence of how much you can withdraw versus your expenses. And the difference is that the withdrawal amount is based on the amount that's in the portfolio, whereas the amount of the expense is increasing every year, but it's being based off of your previous annual expenditures. It gets bumped up by inflation every year. And this is the delta between your withdrawal amount and the amount of your expenses. So continuing on in sort of presenting what's in the model, here are the S&P 500 historic returns. These are the years, and these are the remaining 29 years. I used year to date roughly for year one. And then for the successive years, I went back to 1993 and showed actual returns going all the way out, again, to inject a little bit of reality, hopefully, as well as some randomness into the analyses. So this row here, scenario 1, rate of return, it's a combination of the actual returns multiplied by 60% and 40%. And that's standard across all the rates of return across both scenarios, that 40% times the 3%. If you remember, that was one of the assumptions that I made. Okay, So that's basically the spreadsheet. Again, I don't want to take up too much of your time going into the complexity of the formulas behind the cells. What I really want to focus on was a comparison between scenario 1 and scenario 2. And here it is. So in scenario 1, after 10 years, there's $1,053,000 in your investment portfolio. And if we back up here, scenario 2 should be 1911 after year 10. There it is, just to show you the connection between the two spreadsheets. If I was to put scenario 1 in here, by the way, I'd have to change this number here by these numbers here. It's just an adjustment that I make manually. Okay, back to the comparisons. So after 20 years under scenario 1, where the decreases that I talked about occur in the first 2 years of your retirement, you can see that after 20 years, you're down to 671K. And after 30 years, you're only left with 170K. Compare that to scenario 2, which has the big decreases occurring in years 12 and 13. And you'll see that, of course, by the 10th year, you haven't experienced those big market shocks yet, those big downturns that would hit your portfolio. Okay, so after 20 years, you have had those hits. But as you can see, you're still doing pretty good compared to scenario 1, and you're doing really good compared to scenario 1 when you look at the 30-year, how much money you got left, 915 versus 170. So this hopefully shows you the magnitude of sequence of returns risk in terms of the timing, which is what sequence of returns risk is all about. And again, the scenarios that I put together are based on very specific assumptions and my calculations, how I view it. And so again, just to illustrate a point, it's probably not something your financial planner will put together, but what I'm trying to do is to just give you some food for thought so you get an idea of what sequence of returns risk is all about, and so what it means, so you can talk about it and think about it and plan accordingly. Okay, so now that we've gone over the scenarios and we've seen the difference between the two with respect to the timing of significant market downturns, I want to go over some of the things that you could do to mitigate this risk. And I think that's kind of the good news about sequence of returns risk. There are steps you can take with respect to your retirement planning to mitigate sequence of returns risk. So one thing is that you can use the bucket strategy. And the bucket strategy is a series of 3 or sometimes 4 buckets where you group investments by type according to expenses across time periods. So the way I like to set up bucket 1 is I like to have 2 years of cash in bucket 1. And the cash could be different money market, those kind of things. Very liquid assets, in other words. And the thing about having 2 years in cash and using the bucket strategy is that if you do hit a downturn when you retire in years 1 or 2 early years, don't take losses. Don't sell investments and lock in those losses. Use the cash you've put aside. It's kind of a contingency way of approaching sequence of returns risk. But what it does, it allows you more time for those investments that go down to recover. So I think this is one of the most effective ways that you can mitigate sequence of returns risk. Another thing is that if you do experience these investments going down, don't lose sight of the fact that you should always rebalance your portfolio, because if investments go down, then you're going to have that ratio of 60-40 be maybe more 40-60, equities versus fixed income. You always want to keep, the amount that you have in your equities at your target rate, what your asset allocation target rate is. And one of the things I did when I was looking at the spreadsheet and doing all kinds of different scenarios is that the kind of like the more you have in equities, the lower the risk is over the planning horizon, the more money you have. So that's why I think it's really important to always make sure that you recover your asset allocation target balances. That's really a very important risk adjustment to make, because you want to lock in, you want to ensure that you get the highest possible returns to recover from any losses that you experience. Another thing you can do is you can reduce your spending. If you're in a period of time like we are now where, we're losing money in our investments, well, cut back on your spending, maybe your discretionary spending. when me and my wife retired, we were in a period where actually markets were doing well, but we were so new to retirement that we actually, I think we only spent 3.5%. We really didn't even do 4%. We just wanted to be very conservative until such time that we became more familiar with our spending in retirement and got comfortable with the whole notion of deaccumulation, spending our own money to cover our living expenses. So I think that's just something to consider in general is, reducing your spending in times where markets are going down is a strategy that has merit. And I think for me, it was, as I said, psychologically, it made me feel more comfortable as I adjusted to retirement. Okay, so if you're looking at retirement and you see the markets tumbling and you're paying attention to what people are saying about the economy as well as the markets, you might consider delaying your retirement. As much as that may suck, it is a viable strategy, and there are benefits to delaying retirement a year or two. So that's another thing. Again, it's just another tool at your disposal to mitigate the risk associated with sequence of returns. Another thing I didn't include any assumptions, but something to keep in mind is that you may have a pension, you may eventually get Social Security, you may get income from other streams. Those are ways that also mitigate sequence of returns risk. In other words, you've got that 4% you're taking out of your investments, and you augment that with other streams of income, sources of income, and that's another way to offset any unfortunate timing that you experience with regards to market downturns. All right, let's summarize and wrap things up. So again, I think the key here, which is really important, is that sequence of returns risk really isn't something to be afraid of per se. It is manageable. It's not the best scenario, of course, if you're one of those people that's retiring into a down market, but the thing is, it's not necessarily going to totally derail your retirement spending and your investment portfolio. Now, it does have some implications, though, and that is, as you saw from the comparisons, there may be less money for your estate plan if you don't do things to mitigate the risk. And that would suck for your heirs or your legacy, however you're managing your estate. And there is a marginal risk, increased risk of running out of money, which is, of course, all retirees' number one fear. But again, I think that the numbers are robust enough that I call a marginal increase in risk, because I think it's the 4% withdrawal rate rule. When you look at the fact that you probably have other sources of income, it's really not going to, just like I say, send you to the poor farm. It's just something to be aware of. And again, it just should be a motivation to ensure that you're aware of sequence of returns risk and you're taking steps to mitigate that risk. As I was saying, the scenarios and all the different ones I did, but I didn't share with you, reaffirm the reliability of the 4% safe withdrawal rate rule. And just as an FYI, the safe withdrawal rate rule of 4% was created by a guy named William Bengen in 1994. And he recently came out with a quote where he said that, the safe withdrawal rate really could be 4.7% as opposed to 4%. Now, again, he couches that in all sorts of assumptions, and at the time that he is making that upgrade. But I just wanted to call that to your attention, just so if you want to look more into it, you could see that you could actually increase your withdrawal rate to 4.7%. And a lot of people advocate even more, 5% or more. But that's maybe a subject for another video. And a thing that I discovered in going through all these different things that I was working on the model is that high inflation, as long as it's not persistent across your entire retirement planning horizon, it's not a major factor. It's really not something that I would say is a big impact to the future of your investment portfolio. And as I said earlier, if you'd like a copy of this spreadsheet, just email me and I'll be happy to send you a copy. And another thing is I have some videos on the bucket strategy. I think I have 3 or 4 where I talk about what the bucket strategy is, how to do it, how to manage the bucket strategy. And I have one on financial independence. And in that one, I talk about the 4% withdrawal rate rule and the 25 times rule, which gives you how much money you need to have in order to be able to retire and withdraw at that 4% rule. So there's a presentation there on financial independence that goes into quite a bit of depth about the 4% rule and other factors with respect to financial independence. And phew, if you stayed with me for the entire time, thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Feel free to contact me if you wish. I don't know when my next presentation is going to be. When inspiration hits, who knows? But I'll look forward to doing another one. And until then, again, thank you very much. All the best. Take care. Bye now.